Hello and welcome to this GCSE explainer on development classifications as part of the Changing Economic World unit. And one of the most useful things we can do to understand development and how it changes over space, so that's from place to place, is to actually map it. And we looked at a lot of the classifications, sort of categories of development that we could look at, like life expectancy and literacy rates and things, and we can map those. And the most common way to map data or information is to use a choropleth map, and that's basically, it's a coloured in map where the colours represent certain values. Okay, so we can map all sorts of things: literacy level, the number of calories consumed, the number of mobile phones, and that helps us to classify or put countries into groups with similar characteristics, and that has positive aspects and it has negatives as well. It helps us understand data, but sometimes it means we lump countries together that are reasonably dissimilar. So one of the first things that was done was to map countries according to first, second and third world countries. You might have come across this term in history. The first world were generally wealthier, democratic, industrialised countries. The second world, you can see here in red, those were centrally organised and often communist countries, and the third world were any countries that didn't fall into the other two categories. Okay, so that was the threefold division introduced by the United Nations in 1945. All the free market economies like ours, which trade freely across the globe, those were the first world. The communist countries, if you've not heard of that term before, those countries had different structure to those of the first world and had more government control of business and public services. And the first and the second worlds were at odds with each other. They fought a Cold War, okay, of opposing ideologies. And then the third world comprised a lot of the least developed countries and were fought over by the first and the second worlds. Another way to look at it would be the North-South divide line of the 1980s by Willy Brandt, an ex-German chancellor. And he based his classification on gross national product, that's the wealth of a country. And he divided the countries of the world into two basic groups. There's his line there, the Brandt line of the 1980s. You'll see it travels north of Mexico, north of Cuba, splits through the Mediterranean in two, keeps Europe on the north side and Africa on the south. And then around Asia, spins around South Korea, and then keeps Australia and New Zealand in the north. Basically said the countries north of that line were rich, developed, industrialised countries, and the ones south of the line were poor, developing agricultural countries. Now obviously it's very old, nearly 40 years old, and has fallen out of favour. So the idea was it was, home to 4 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Only G8 are in that northern bloc. Has enough food and water for 95% of its population. 95% of people have access to functioning education. It controls 4/5 of the world income, and they own about 90% of the manufacturing industries. But it's fallen out of favour because it's too simple. You can probably identify many countries in the south there that are actually very, very wealthy now. Malaysia stands out in my mind. China's emerging. India, South Africa, lots of the North African countries, many countries in South America. Geographically incorrect because a lot of the countries, if you drew the equator on there through the mouths of the Amazon across there, you can see most of the countries are actually in the northern hemisphere. And then we have development changing over times as well. So a lot of the countries that I've just mentioned have developed. This method's maybe a little bit more recent and maybe a bit more useful. So it's a 5-fold division of wealth based on rich industrial countries in North America, Western Europe, Australia and New Zealand there. You have a lot of credence given to the oil exporting countries because those countries have made a lot of money from exporting oil. Okay, and you might have heard of an organisation called OPEC. We've got the newly industrialising countries, all your newly emerging economies like China and India. You've got the formerly centrally planned economies, the previous communist systems, and then heavily indebted poor countries, which you might see abbreviated to HIPC. So that's a more recent method. And then the current method that's preferred is to split into high and low income. So we use gross national income, and then low income countries are $1,045 or below, and high income countries are $12,746 or above, and then in between you've got your middle income countries, which you can see in yellow and in purple. Okay, and as you can see, I've left the brand line on there. There's lots of green countries with high income south of that line, which makes a bit of a mockery of it. And then, north of the line, we've got countries like Ukraine and so on that are only middle income countries. So it does show you that line has dated. The alternative is to graph Human Development Index, which we can see on there. I've graphed it in quintiles or fifths or 20% chunks, and you can see there again which countries have high Human Development Index and which ones have low, and that's another useful way of showing development, because you've got a comparative measure for life expectancy, literacy and education. So you've got economic and social factors. Okay, so that's mapping development. Two websites you might want to check out: worldmapper.org distorts countries according to their key features. So that's earthquakes, okay, likelihood of earthquakes. So you can see that on there. The other one might be Gapminder. This is a brilliant website. This graphs various bits of data showing income, and then over on this side you can't see it. Sorry, I forgot that. It's life expectancy. Okay. So to finish up, we'll just have a little joke. Studying geography helps extend your life expectancy. 60 minutes in a geography class feels like 3 hours. See you later.